Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski and our guest for this evening is Maureen Watt, former SNP MSP for Aberdeen South and North Kincardine. Hello, Maureen.
Hi, Patrick. Nice to see you.
It's great to have you. For our first story, we have the Ukraine update, day 810 of a conflict. At least 15 people were killed and 20 injured on Sunday when part of a Russian apartment block collapsed after being struck by fragments of a missile, launched by Ukraine and shot down by Russia, Russian officials said. In one of the deadliest attacks to date on the region of Belgorod, Russian officials said Ukraine launched an attack involving at least 12 missiles, including Tochka ballistic missiles and Adler and RM-70 Vampire multiple launch rocket systems. There was no immediate comment from Ukraine. Kiev has previously said targeting Russia's military, transport, and energy infrastructure undermines Moscow's war effort. Belgorod lies close to the border and is considered a vital stop for Russian supply lines. Ukraine's top military commander admitted on Sunday that the situation in the northeastern Kharkiv region was difficult as Russia continued an assault in the area. Colonel General Alexander Syrsky denied that the Russians had made a significant breakthrough, but said his forces were on the back foot. The Russian Defense Ministry said on Sunday that its forces had captured 4 villages in Kharkiv, in addition to 5 villages reported to have been seized on Saturday. Ukraine did not confirm the claims. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Sunday that fighting was going on in a string of villages in the Kharkiv region. In his nightly video address, Zelensky also noted fierce battles in various parts of Donetsk region to the southeast. He said defensive battles were taking place along large sections of the border in Kharkiv. The town of Vovchansk, among the largest in the northeast with a pre-war population of 17,000, emerged as a focal point in the battle. Volodymyr Tymoshko, the head of the Kharkiv regional police, said on Sunday afternoon that Russian forces were on the outskirts of the town and approaching from 3 directions. Tymoshko said Russian tactics in Vovchansk mirrored those in the battles of Bakhmut and Avdiivka in the Donetsk region, in which heavy aerial attacks were accompanied by droves of infantry assaults. At least 4,000 civilians have fled the Kharkiv region since Friday, when Moscow's forces launched the operation. Governor Oleg Syniehubov said in a social media statement. Russian President Vladimir Putin removed his longtime ally Sergei Shoigu as defense minister in the most significant reshuffle to the military command since Russian troops invaded Ukraine more than 2 years ago. In a surprise announcement, the Kremlin said Andrei Belousov, a former deputy prime minister who specializes in economics, will replace Shoigu. Putin proposed that Shoigu take the position as head of Russia's powerful Security Council. Lithuanians voted on Sunday in a presidential election expected to hand a new term to incumbent Gitanas Nausėda, a staunch supporter of Ukraine in its 2-year war with Russia, after a campaign focusing on security concerns in the Baltic states. Across the region, voters are worried that the former Soviet republics that make up the Baltics, now members of the NATO military alliance and the European Union, could be the targets of Russian aggression in the future. Maureen, passing over to you, what do you make of the developments in Ukraine to this day?
Yeah, well, I think it was very worrying that we have seen a breakthrough by Russian troops in the Kharkiv region and taking over several villages on the border, reputedly. Apparently, some people are saying in Ukraine that the Russian troops were able to march in unhindered, which is very worrying. And I see that the leadership in Ukraine have replaced some, I think it's military generals or governors of the region. But in any case, it's a very worrying development. One wonders why Vladimir Putin has replaced his military general with somebody who's an economics expert. That seems quite weird to me, but maybe there's reasoning behind it. But yes, one wonders if the military that has been promised by the West to Ukraine is actually getting through, and whether Ukraine concentrating on bombing sites inside Russian territory is maybe at the expense of what has been pretty much a normal conventional ground war.
Thank you, Maureen. For our next story, we've got the latest from Israel and Gaza. At least 35,091 Palestinian people have been killed and 78,827 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October, the Gaza Health Ministry said in a statement today. Gaza's health ministry said earlier today that the health system across the devastated enclave could collapse shortly. A few hours separate us from the collapse of the health system in the Gaza Strip as a result of a failure to bring in the fuel necessary to operate electricity generators in hospitals, ambulances, and transport employees, the ministry said in a post on social media. Residents said Israeli tanks pushed further into Jabalia in the northern Gaza Strip today, with tank shells landing at the center of the city's refugee camp and airstrikes destroying clusters of houses. Palestinian health officials have said that they recovered at least 20 bodies of Palestinian people killed in overnight Israeli airstrikes in Jabalia, while dozens of people were reported injured. Israeli forces fired on ambulances trying to reach injured people as Israeli air raids hit crowded residential areas within the sprawling refugee camp, Al Jazeera Arabic reported. Rafah residents received more evacuation orders through phone calls and text messages, causing more desperate people to start packing and leave the city. Between 360,000 and 500,000 Palestinians have fled Rafah in the past week after Israeli warnings to evacuate before an imminent military assault. With the evacuation order and arrival of fighting, hospitals swiftly shut and meager aid supplies vanished. Residents say they have no idea where they will go now or how they will get there. A series of videos are circulating on social media showing groups of settlers and right-wing activists blocking aid trucks traveling from Hebron towards Gaza in the West Bank, crossing to Tarkumia. Egypt's Foreign Minister, Sameh Shoukry, told the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, that continued Israeli military operations in Gaza, and especially in Rafah, the border city between Egypt and the enclave, have grave security risks. Israel's Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, has briefed Blinken about Israel's military operation in Rafah and the takeover of a nearby border crossing into Egypt. In an overnight phone call, Hezbollah fighters fired a guided missile at an Israeli Merkava tank across the border this morning, destroying it after closely monitoring the enemy's movements, quote. The group said this in a statement they released. The Israeli army said two anti-tank missiles crossed from Lebanon into the area of Yifta, a kibbutz community less than 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles, from the border. The missiles injured 4 Israeli soldiers, the army said, one of them moderately and the rest lightly. Maureen, what do you make of the Israel conflict?
I'm almost lost for words. I mean, the Israelis tell those in Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza, to move from Rafah and the south, where they were originally told to move to, because they are continuing their operations there. Apparently, they haven't eliminated all Hamas supporters and activists. It really is. I mean, you have to call it a genocide. It's just awful. I mean, I've said before that I think they're just trying to almost biblically drive the people of Gaza into the sea. And that's what seems to be happening. I mean, they're telling them to go to somewhere that's already overcrowded with people living in tents and things, and there's no sanitary conditions, proper sanitary conditions, or anything. And yet, Biden and the West, and even those who are trying to negotiate a peace settlement, seem to be absolutely powerless. It must go down in history as one of the most awful um, catastrophic events of our century.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Shifting our focus over to Scotland, First Minister says the Scottish Government will drive economic growth for benefit of all in Scotland. First Minister John Swinney has pledged that his government will drive economic growth in Scotland to allow for investment in public services, delivery of fair wages, and the eradication of child poverty. Attending the groundbreaking for the Attending the groundbreaking for the new Aberystwyth port today, Mr. Swinney set out the need for all sections of Scotland's economy and society to unite to deliver strong economic growth with a clear social purpose, calling on business, trade unions, civic society, and Scotland's colleges and universities to work more closely with government in the national interest. The First Minister has made clear that an end to UK government austerity will be required if Scotland is to meet its full economic potential, but that the Scottish Government will use every tool at its disposal to maximise economic growth. Mr. Swinney said the following: "My government will support business and economic growth, not for its own sake, but for a clear social purpose. It is the outcomes of growth which will deliver public funding we can invest in public services like the NHS and schools and ultimately create a fairer society. It is vital that benefits of economic growth are felt right across Scotland, and equally, it is vital that all of Scotland contributes to our economic success. I want to see every aspect of our economy and society working together to achieve the best economic outcomes for Scotland. If we can ensure that these outstanding economic strengths unite to work together in a national mission to drive economic growth for the benefit of all, Scotland would be an even more formidable economic force. The failed austerity agenda pursued by the Conservatives for 14 years and now supported by Labour is continuing to hold Scotland's economy back. And as First Minister, I will continue to make the case for a change in approach and for these powers to be in Scotland's hands through independence. But I will also use every tool at the Scottish Government's disposal to maximise economic growth now. With an economy working to its full potential, public services would get the investment they need to thrive. Workers would receive fair pay and no longer be struggling with a cost of living, and not a single child in Scotland would be forced to live in poverty." Maureen, what do you make of that speech? And as a wider point, where do you think we see the big successes of government cooperating with all of these other facets of a country's society?
That's a big question. I wonder if anybody knows the answer to that. I mean, clearly, um, John Swinney is ploughing his own furrow and showing that he is not a continuity candidate, but a unity candidate in all sense of the word, insofar as he wants all parts of society to cooperate towards economic growth that benefits all. It's obviously poignant that he was speaking today in Ardeshir in the Highland area, where, because of the potential of offshore renewables, there is the potential of growth and economic prosperity. And the investment in Ardeshir port today is a combination, I understand, of money from the Scottish Investment Bank and the UK and a UK fund. I don't know whether it's the Growth Fund or not, which we should remember is supposed to be a substitute for previous investments that we would have had from the European Union, and of course goes nowhere in the direction of meeting the size of the European investment that places like the Highlands and Islands was very good at accessing. So John Swinney has set out his stall today in terms of the Scottish Government's commitment to economic growth. And I think it's now incumbent on the rest of Scottish society, including organisations like the CBI and the Chambers of Commerce and city bids and these kind of organisations to demonstrate that they are prepared to work with the Scottish Government for the benefit of Scotland and not keep carping as they have been doing in recent years at the Scottish Government.
Thank you very much, Maureen. For our next story, Rishi Sunak calls SNP extremists for wanting to leave the UK. Rishi Sunak has vowed to fight the next election on the UK's security, attacking Labour and Keir Starmer in a fiercely political speech at the Policy Exchange think tank, in which he said, "The choice at the next election is, who do you trust to keep you safe?" The Prime Minister said in his speech he would frame the Conservatives as the party of the future, but also defended the party's record over the past 14 years, and said Starmer's past actions meant the Labour leader would not be able to keep the country safe. In his wide-ranging speech, Sunak refused to name an election date, but said he would debate Starmer as many times as he likes during the campaign. Talking about the threats to the UK, Sunak said extremists are also exploiting these global conflicts to divide us. People are abusing our liberal democratic values, the freedom of speech and right to protest, to intimidate, threaten, and assault others, to sing anti-Semitic chants on our streets. He claimed in his list of threats Scottish nationalists who seek on a break-up of our beautiful union. Commenting, the SNP's Westminster deputy leader, Marie Black MP, said, "Independence is supported by half of Scotland's population, and Rishi Sunak's desperate attacks on Scottish voters will only encourage more people to reject the Tories and vote SNP. Real extremists in the UK are the Tory party, who have trashed the economy, imposed deep cuts to public services, and dragged Scotland out of the EU against our will. And the best way to beat the Tories in Scotland is to vote SNP at the general election, to stand up for Scotland's values and advance Scotland's journey to independence." Maureen, is there a certain risk of these so-called like anti-extremist laws where extremism can be defined in so many ways and can mean so many different things to different parties? How do you think that applies in this case?
Well, I think Rishi Sunak is treading very dangerous ground if he is trying to link the democratically elected Scottish National Party, which this year is celebrating 90 years of its existence, as extremists and part of groups which Rishi Sunak would like to designate as extremists. I think that is a very dangerous path to go down, and he risks trashing, any legislation against extremism which this government is threatening to bring in. And I think it's just his speech today, although I haven't read it all or seen it all, but I've heard snippets, is a desperate man from a desperate party trying to frighten the electorate from a frightened first Prime Minister whose government is on the rocks. And I think if a general election campaign is going to be one based on fear and saying that nobody can run the government in these desperate international times, that smacks to me as something, the sort of campaign that somebody like Vladimir Putin would run. It's just unbelievably bad, and I hope that people in Scotland will see how desperate it is and realise that we would be much better on governing ourselves, because government in Westminster and England is just tanking, in my view.
Thank you, Maureen. Our next story, John Swinney writes to Gillian Mackay, MSP, to reassure her about support for buffer zones bill. First Minister John Swinney has written to Scottish Green MSP Gillian Mackay to reassure her that the Scottish Government will continue to support the passage of her abortion services Safe Access Zones Scotland Bill. Mr Swinney said that his government remains fully committed to supporting Ms Mackay on the bill and to ensuring that those who provide or access abortion services can do so without fear, intimidation, or unwanted influence. He recognized that people have a right to protest and to free speech in a democracy. However, he said no one has the right to harass patients or in any way impede women's rights to access healthcare. Mr Swinney said he was delighted that members across the chamber had endorsed the general principles of the bill at stage 1, and he was encouraged by the robustness of the debate and for the level of support the bill received. The First Minister said that this issue has shown what can be achieved when Parliament works together, cross-party, and he hoped that he will continue as the bill moves on to stage 2. Mr Swinney said the following: "We will continue to support you to deliver this bill and the vital protections it seeks to provide. And I thank you for all the work you have done so far to make the bill a reality." Maureen, what are your thoughts on this bill?
Well, I'm pleased that John Swinney has said that this bill has government support. It is a private member's bill by the Green MSP Gillian Mackay, and it did pass at first reading with more support than I think Gillian Mackay expected, and she was delighted with the support that the bill received at stage 1 a couple of weeks ago, I think it was. And this bodes well for its passage through the Scottish Parliament. If the government is supporting the bill, then any amendments that come forward will be discussed with the relevant government minister in order to make sure that it's properly drafted and that that it's watertight. So hopefully this means that the bill will proceed as normal, and that it doesn't hopefully become part of culture wars, which some people seem to want to rage in Scotland, where I don't think that it has any real clout in Scotland. I think we're a fair, open, honest country who believes in the rights of all our citizens, and fear and intimidation should not be part of something that women who are in turmoil in their own minds should be subjected to as they decide what's best for their own bodies.
Thank you, Maureen. Our next story, new research shows strong growth in Scotland's economy. New data has revealed that Scotland's economy is going from strength to strength. Figures from the Royal Bank of Scotland have shown that in April, Scotland's private sector achieved strong growth in employment. The data highlighted that Scotland had the second highest employment growth in the UK, behind only Northern Ireland, who, unlike Scotland, benefit from access to the EU single market. This latest analysis follows figures showing that in 2023, earnings in Scotland grew faster than any other part of the UK, and foreign investment continues to outpace the rest of the UK and Europe. New First Minister John Swinney has said that his government will prioritise driving economic growth in Scotland to allow for investment in public services, delivery of fair wages, and the eradication of child poverty. Comment from SNP MSP Willie Coffey said, "Delivering economic growth in Scotland will ensure that we can invest in public services, deliver better wages across society, and eradicate child poverty." These latest figures show that in Scotland, under the SNP government, the actions we are taking to support businesses are resulting in more well-paid jobs being created across the country. Maureen, what do you attribute this economic growth to?
Um, well, I don't think you can attribute it to one particular factor, but I think this information coming out today, coupled with the fact that the First Minister made a strong speech on the economy at Ardersier today, shows a reprioritization, if you like, in the Scottish government's approach to governing, and you know this shouldn't be a surprise to anybody because Scotland is a wealthy country that can stand on its own 2 feet, and it has always performed well in most indicators, better than most regions of the UK, and normally, for example, in inward investment, better third after London and the southeast of England. So I think, strong employment figures um, are inevitably a result of Brexit and the fact that we haven't enough people to do the jobs that are around. And that, again, means that you get growth in earnings. So you do wonder how much better the economy could perform if we had more people there to do the jobs that need doing, because clearly there are companies who cannot expand as quickly as they would like to because they do not have the staff available to do the jobs. And one thing that I'd like to add is that I think John is stressing that growth is for a purpose, and the purpose is to make sure that we have the tax returns to invest in health and education, and as there has been a great focus on, eliminate child poverty.
Hmm. And I suppose expanding on that, you mentioned John Swinney there. We've got a new First Minister. You mentioned earlier that you're seeing him as a unity sort of leader. Do you trust him as a growth leader and a business leader as well?
Yes, I do. I'm trying to think who John worked for, but he worked in the financial sector, I think, before he even became an MP. And he has been Scotland's finance secretary for many years. So he understands this part of government and this part um, of how important it is to make people realise that Scotland is a country that's wealthy and can stand on its own 2 feet. So by showing that the economy is thriving in Scotland and demonstrating that the economy is thriving in Scotland, surely that will give people more confidence in themselves and their country to see that with all the levers of running a country, Scotland could do much better. So I think it's a clever move by John Swinney, and is necessary to kind of counterbalance some of the rubbish in the mainstream media that the government was concentrating, because it was in partnership with the Greens, on other issues. But the economy in most governments is at the heart and centre, because a strong economy, as I said, giving tax receipts, means that you have money to spend on the things that you want to do to make everybody's life better.
Thank you, Maureen. For our next story, a report reveals banks have given almost $7 trillion to fossil fuel firms since the Paris deal. New research has found that the world's big banks have handed nearly $7 trillion, specifically £5.6 trillion in funding to the fossil fuel industry since the Paris Agreement to limit carbon emissions. Researchers from the Banking on Climate Chaos report now in its 15th edition, analyzed the world's top 60 banks is underwriting and lending to more than 4,200 fossil fuel firms and companies, causing the degradation of the Amazon and Arctic. In 2016, after talks in Paris, 196 countries signed an agreement to limit global heating as a result of carbon emissions to its most 2 Celsius above pre-industrial levels, with an ideal limit of 1.5 Celsius to prevent the worst impacts of a drastically changed climate. Many countries have since promised to reduce carbon emissions, but the latest research shows private interests continue to funnel money to oil, gas, and coal companies, which have used it to expand their operations. 8 in 10 of the world's most eminent climate scientists now foresee at least 2.5 degrees Celsius of global heating, according to the latest of the Guardian survey published last week. An outcome expected to lead to devastating consequences for civilization. The research found that banks have given $6.9 trillion in financing to oil, coal, and gas companies, nearly half of which, $3.3 trillion, went towards fossil fuel expansion, even in 2023, 2 years after many large banks vowed to work towards lowering emissions as part of the net zero banking alliance. Bank finance for fossil fuel companies was $705 billion, with 300 I'm just going to lowering emissions as part of a net zero banking alliance. Bank finance for fossil fuel companies was $705 billion, with $347 billion going towards expansion, the report says. US banks were the biggest financiers of the fossil fuel industry, contributing 30% of the total $705 billion provided in 2023, the report found. JP Morgan Chase gave the most of any bank in the world, providing $40.8 billion to fossil fuel companies in 2023, while Bank of America came in third. The world's second biggest financier of fossil fuels was the Japanese bank Mizuho, which provided $37.1 billion. London-based Barclays was Europe's biggest fossil fuel financier with $24.2 billion, followed by Spain's Santander at $14.5 billion and Germany's Deutsche Bank with $13.4 billion. Overall, European banks provided just over a quarter of the total fossil fuel financing in 2023, according to the report. Maureen, do you think these discussions and agreements between banks and economic officials have had much of an impact on the investment portfolios of these different enterprises?
I've been on Broadcasting Scotland at the time of the international summits on climate change, and talked about how I felt that banks and big corporations were taking over these climate summit talks, and they were all there with big delegations and obviously trying to use their influence on these talks. And maybe soft sell or sweet talk is perhaps the word I'm looking for. Sweet talk people about how good the good that they do. But yet here, it was a very detailed summary of the report that you gave. We see that banks are, sweet talking with one hand, but still investing huge sums in oil and gas and coal. And I suppose it's all about return on investment. And that's where we have still a long way to go to show that renewables are an equally good investment, but perhaps, I was going to say long term, but the initial capital investment in oil and gas takes ages before it comes to fruition. So, I mean, what bothers me is that while this money is being invested in oil and gas and coal, it's not being invested in lots of other things that would do better for be better for economies throughout the world. Um, so my message to climate activists, though, would be to go and if they are having demonstrations, demonstrate in front of these banks, demonstrate at the AGMs of these banks, and show how we see what they're doing and see that they are actually not helping at all in terms of reducing climate emissions and helping countries get to net zero.
And Maureen, I suppose, what would you make of the argument that we're living at a time of pretty rampant economic instability? There are conflicts, unstable governments, and potentially other factors as well. What would you make of the argument that now just isn't the time to revolutionize the way that we participate in energy? There's a lot of infrastructure. There's a lot of vested interest in that. What would you say to people that make the argument that now just isn't the time to be playing that and injecting more instability into our system?
Well, how are we injecting more instability into our system? Sorry, I'm not.
By hypothetically, if we were to convert the way that we produce our energy and the way that we consume it, if we were to divest from oil and gas and instead put that funding into renewables.
But that's what just transition is all about. I mean, it's not just about the jobs, for example, here in the Northeast where I'm speaking to you from tonight. It's about a just transition in things like the investment and where it goes. So we know that it's been very difficult in the past for renewable companies, wind companies, for example, to get investment from banks and finance companies to help invest. I mean, the fact that we haven't got a wind turbine production facility in Scotland, for example, shows how lacking in risk many of the banks are. I mean, surely it's a done deal if there are so many wind farms off our shores in Scotland that building a wind turbine factory in Scotland would have great potential. So I think there is a great reluctance in many banks to take that risk, which we expect banks to do. I mean, we've talked earlier on in the programme about the amount of money that governments are putting into investment in the port in Ardersier. And what worries me, and I've thought about for a long time, is that more and more businesses are expecting governments, often without a stake in the projects, to invest government money, taxpayers' money, and yet these companies are not prepared to take the risk themselves and, risk the dividends that they give to shareholders. So it's we've got to a stage that's very unbalanced, I think, in our countries, that big companies and banks are not prepared to take some of the risk, a bigger proportion of the risk now than they did in the past. I mean, I can't remember in the 1970s a lot of talk about government investment in the oil and gas industry. Indeed, Maggie Thatcher sold off Brit Oil to the private sector. So I think we've really, in this country at least, and obviously in the States, got investment and risk wrong somehow.
Interesting. Thank you. Police in Georgia are accused of beating people protesting against foreign influence bill. Riot police armed with water cannons and tear gas have been accused of beating protesters who picketed outside Georgia's parliament to try to stop a final vote on a controversial foreign influence law. The fresh scenes of violence this morning came as hundreds of masked officers charged down demonstrators who had been attempting to block off access to the parliament in the capital, to Tbilisi. Sorry. Individual protesters were hauled away by officers, and footage later shared on social media appeared to show two of those detained being kicked and punched by police. The agency responsible for investigating allegations of police brutality, the Special Investigation Service, said later this morning that it had opened a case into claims of use of excessive force. The protesters have been seeking to stop a committee of MPs from signing off on a bill that would sign non-governmental groups and media to register as organizations serving the interests of a foreign power, if more than 20% of their funding comes from overseas. Opponents of the bill, including the US State Department, claim it is inspired by Russian legislation passed in 2012, which they say had been used to persecute critics of the Kremlin. The EU has warned that passing the legislation will damage Georgia's chances of joining the bloc. Demonstrators failed to keep MPs out of the parliamentary estate, and the government-dominated committee passed the bill in 67 seconds at 9 a.m. A final vote of the whole parliament will take place on Tuesday. Maureen, what do you think would be the impact of such a bill taking place?
Yeah, I've been listening to reports of what's happening in Georgia, and clearly the attitude of the police has been very heavy-handed, and one wonders why. Because the demonstrators have been staging peaceful demonstrations over the days on this. I don't quite understand the ins and outs of the legislation, but the fact that it seems to be based on Russian legislation is quite worrying. And also, it does seem to fly in the face of legislation, or it flies in the face of Georgia wanting to join the EU. If the West and the EU is saying this is not going to hasten in any way your consideration of your membership for the EU, I wonder why the Georgian legislators are so keen on passing it. It'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow when all MPs debate it. But I would say it's a step in the wrong direction for Georgia, and very worrying.
Thank you, Maureen. Our next story, Michael Cohen tells court he would lie or bully people for Donald Trump. Donald Trump's former fixer and now key prosecution witness, Michael Cohen, told a New York court that he would sometimes lie or bully people to accomplish a task to make Trump happy in the ex-president's criminal hush money trial today. Cohen is core to the case against Trump, as he is accused of getting $130,000 to the adult film actor Stormy Daniels days before the 2016 election, in exchange for her silence about an alleged sexual encounter with Trump 10 years earlier. Prosecutors contend that Trump's repayment of Cohen in 2017 was criminal because he listed the reimbursements as legal expenses in financial documents. Cohen's testimony will be crucial to establish that Trump knew that the repayment scheme would be logged in the Trump Organization's books as legal expense, and that the false entries were in violation of election law. Cohen said he first met Trump through the former president's son, Donald Jr., as he was moving into one of his properties. Trump asked him to fix an issue with the board at Trump World Tower. Cohen said the following: "He liked the way that occurred, and then continued to ask me if I would assist in other issues, legal issues, or other matters that he had." Eventually, Cohen said, Trump hired him full-time as an executive vice president and counsel. On his role in the Trump Organization, Cohen said, "I would only answer to him," adding that he worked as Trump's special counsel for 10 years until January 2017, and said he was making approximately $525,000. Cohen explained to the court how he extricated Trump from the controversial Trump University business courses. Trump University fell into trouble, and thus were approximately 50 vendors that had not been paid, but just $2 million available to pay them, he said. He also described legal fixing for Trump with the press. If they said something that angered him, I would reach out to the press and express to them they needed to redact or take the article down, or we would file an action against them. Asked if he worked with the press to minimize negative stories and enhance positive stories about Trump and his business, Cohen answered, yes. Cohen confirmed that many others have said, that Trump did not communicate by email and provided an eyebrow-raising explanation. Mr. Trump never had an email address. Emails are like written papers. Quote. Cohen recalled Trump saying, It's too many people that have gone down as a direct result of having emails that prosecutors can use in a case. Mr. Cohen's testimony continuing. Maureen, have you been following the case closely? What have you made of it so far?
Well, I've seen some of it. I wouldn't say that it's something that I would go out of my way to watch or listen to. And even Donald Trump finds it difficult, apparently, to listen to it because he's been falling asleep and dribbling from the mouth while he's been in court. But I did see him outside court this morning saying that it was, it was the state and Biden using legal tactics to try and get him out of the race for president because he wasn't winning and Biden was the worst president that the United States have ever had and blah, 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 which I thought was him speaking about the trial outside the courthouse. I think he's already been fined for doing that. So he's clearly testing the judge's patience with him. Michael Cohen is testifying for the prosecution. I think he's already been had a court case, and I'm not sure if he's still in jail or he was in jail for what had done to help Trump. So, the fact that he's was a legal fixer for Trump, we shouldn't be surprised at all by that. We shouldn't be surprised of the bully boy tactics that he employed on behalf of Trump in relation to the press, because Trump is a bully. We saw that, and we have seen that in the Northeast in relation to his golf course here. So this is really an interesting trial, and I think Michael Cohen is the last of the prosecution witnesses. It will be interesting to see who Trump has to come to his defense when we get there, and what the outcome of the trial will be.
Thank you, Maureen. Our next story is a £3 million grant for new semiconductor chip research facility at the University of Glasgow. A major new grant will allow the University of Glasgow to build one of the UK's largest advanced research facilities for silicon chip integration and packaging. The Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council's Strategic Equipment Grant Scheme will provide £3 million to help the university establish Analog, the automated nano-analyzing, characterization, and additive packaging suite. Analog will enable the rapid prototyping and characterization of a wide range of semiconductor devices. New developments prototyped at Analog could find applications in biomedical implants, sustainable and biodegradable sensors, and quantum computing interfaces. The facility which will be based at the university's Mazumdar Shah Advanced Research Center, ARC, brings together researchers from the university's James Watt School of Engineering with a strategic network of partners from industry, national semiconductor facilities, and academia, aligned with fast tracking disruptive new technologies into applications. It aims to support the UK's semiconductor strategy by providing access to new technologies to boost cutting edge research and development. It will also play a role in expanding the country's semiconductor skills base through industry led events and partnerships with centres for doctoral training across the UK. The equipment will be automated as a single suite, making it the UK's first machine-driven integrated assembly and characterization line for semiconductor devices. Analog's advanced automation will allow users to use the suite remotely, with support from on-site experts, helping to streamline the research process. Analog will also provide support for ongoing efforts to decarbonize the electronic supply chain by helping researchers gather data on their products' environmental impact. Analog will be open to academia and industry working on low volume and high value research and development projects, helping them to rapidly prototype advanced nano-electronic devices. Professor Hadi Haidari, head of the University of Glasgow's Electronics and Nanoscale Engineering Research Division, is the project's principal investigator. He said, "This grant is a significant milestone for semiconductor research in the UK, which is a key part of the country's economy. The electronics sector as a whole supports more than 1 million jobs in the country, and the UK government has ambitious plans to grow the sector in the years to come." Maureen, does that excite you? How much does that mean to you? Semiconductor research and nanoscale technology, and are you glad to see investments in it?
One of the great things about Broadcasting Scotland and the stories that it highlights every day that we broadcast is that there's always, nearly always, a story like this. And I wonder if anybody's keeping a list of all the innovations that are highlighted by Broadcasting Scotland are obviously happening throughout Scotland, because we should never forget that we have 5 of the world's top 100 universities in Scotland. And the innovation that is happening in our universities, often with business backing, is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, the health innovation that happens in Scotland is really, really interesting. And, this adds to the, for me, it adds to the confidence I would have of Scotland being an independent country, because we tend to think of the inventors of old, but innovation and invention is continuing in Scotland, but it's never broadcast or highlighted enough.
Yeah, thank you, Maureen. For our final story, I might actually need a little bit of help from you, Maureen. We've got the National Police Dog Trials at Tullyallen. Am I saying that right? Maureen, are you with me?
Yeah, Tullyallen.
Tullyallen. Tullyallen. All
Yeah.
right. That's so the National Police Dog Trials at Tullyallen. Members of the public are invited to join Police Scotland at the 62nd annual National Police Dog Trials next week. The event sees police dogs and their handlers from across the United Kingdom compete in a series of trials, including agility, searching, and obedience at the Police Scotland's headquarters in Tullyallen. PDs Amber, Eli, and Luza will be representing Police Scotland in the competition. The public can watch the agility event from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. each day from Tuesday, 21st of May to Thursday, 23rd of May, 2024. Tickets are not required to attend the event. However, there is no parking available within the grounds. Members of the public with a blue badge may park within the grounds of headquarters. There will not be any catering facilities at the event. Anyone wishing to attend is advised to bring their own refreshments. Dogs are welcome, but Police Scotland ask they are kept at distance from the display grounds. Maureen, have you ever seen these police dog trials? Of
I've seen
first
plenty.
time, yeah. No,
I've
sorry.
seen
Please
plenty.
continue.
I've seen plenty sheepdog trials, which actually I find really fascinating and captivating. And it would be interesting to see um, how they compare with the national police dog trials. I presume when they say national police dog trials, it's UK wide rather than the different um, divisions within Scotland,
Interesting.
and at this time that Tully Allen are hosting it, which are lovely. It's a lovely site, the Tully Allen police headquarters, where all the training takes place. But I don't think I'd be going. But I'm sure for many people it would be quite a nice day out.
And you were absolutely correct as well. It is police dogs and their handlers from across the United Kingdom competing. I may well tune in myself. And speaking of tuning in,
I don't. I don't
uh,
know if it'll be broadcast or will it?
uh,
Might be.
maybe I can find it somewhere. But thank you to our viewers for tuning in today at Broadcasting Scotland. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base with and regular funding. Thank you again to our guest, Maureen Watt, former SNP MSP for Aberdeen South and North Kincardine. Thank you for joining me. It was lovely having you. And
You're
goodbye to our
welcome.
viewers. Bye.